Joining me now is Heather McGhee. She's the Vice President for Policy and Outreach at Demos. Hi, Heather. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So recently, you guys released a report called Stacked Deck, which kind of goes into some real detail about how wealth inequality is really eroding the quality of American democracy and really kind of misaligning our priorities. And I think that this probably confirms a lot of people's intuitive impressions of what's going on. But you guys go into much sort of greater detail in this report and connect a lot of dots. So I'm just wondering if you could give what you think the kind of key takeaways are from this report and what the most sort of important lessons to draw from it are.
Yeah, I mean, we at Demos went about to try to really put some numbers and see what the most rigorous political and social science research was saying about the link between political inequality and economic inequality. And you're totally right, Michael, that it seems absolutely intuitive. We know that when people who have a lot of money, because of our campaign finance system, are able to influence elections and hold sway over politicians once they're in office, the politicians are going to cater to their interests. But what we wanted to tease out was how much their interests were misaligned with the vast majority of working Americans, and particularly on economic issues. Because if you kind of think about, your sort of Bloomberg billionaire, gun control, right? That's something that he really cares about. That's not so different from the rest of us. There's no reason why a wealthy person would have a different opinion than working and middle-class people on social issues, issues of environmental protections, issues of marriage equality and civil rights. But where the social and political science research really found that these interests diverge is when it comes to the basic questions about how the economy should be ordered, how high the minimum wage should be, how high taxes should be, the role of regulations in the corporate structure. Also things about the different priorities. For example, the report, Stacked Deck, showed that, wealthy people think that higher education should be invested in, absolutely. Think that there should be more money in education. But more importantly, they think that taxes should be low and the deficit should be addressed. And so when it comes down to that prioritization, a lot of their deficit cutting and tax cutting interests win out over the sheer necessity of more revenue in order to pay for higher education, which wealthy respondents to public opinion polls always say they support.
Right, right. No, that makes perfect sense. And I think another kind of important thing to highlight from this report, which really struck me, was that you say that lower income voters are voting at higher rates than they have, I think, since the mid 1960s. And I thought that was very interesting because there's this kind of, I would say that there's a certain, even among some people on the left, there's this kind of comfortable narrative of like, well, you just need to activate certain constituencies. You need to get people voting. You need to get people kind of in the process in a certain way. And then naturally there'll be a response to their policy concerns. And I think what we've seen, you know, the numbers are up, according to this report, highest since the mid 1960s. You saw African American voters facing down kind of systemic efforts to disenfranchise them to still exercise their right to vote. But yet, in the broader context of this report, not just through voting, but civic life, political influence, and participation, lower income voters are really systemically screened out, even as they're sort of theoretically doing what everybody's been saying they're supposed to do. Is that right?
It is right. So basically, one of the reasons I, in the beginning of my career, got into policy areas around the questions of what the rules are on voting is because of that concept, right? That if everyone voted at the same rates as the wealthiest, that we would have a different shape of our democracy. I mean, if you walk around the halls of Congress and you talk to, even the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, they'll say that one of the problems with protecting, food stamps and Medicaid is that, quote unquote, the poor don't vote.
Right.
What we've seen is that, and I think it does have to do with the radicalization of our politics and the growing inequality and how much people who feel like they have something at stake and decisions are being made in capitals in Washington that are affecting them in their very homes. We have seen the rates of voter participation go up among working class folks, among low-income folks, among people of color, and among youth. However, still, there is a significant gap between the lowest income households' voting rates and the highest income households. And part of that has to do with the rules of our election process. I mean, we've got this arcane system that is really wrapped up in red tape, needless red tape, so that for people who are, working 3 jobs, who move a lot, mobility rates are a lot higher as you go down the economic ladder. It is needlessly complex to make sure that you are registered to vote in the right place, in many cases 30 days before an election. So that's part of the agenda has to be, yes, making sure that donors don't have more power than voters in doing campaign finance reform, but also to make sure that all voters have the same power to exercise their freedom to vote. And that means things like same-day registration, universal registration, really saying that as a government we have to have a commitment to lowering the barriers to voting.
It's almost like there's 2 tracks that I see in this report in kind of democratic participation. It's sort of like an airport or something where you have business class and everything is kind of designed to get people faster and faster access and easier, more and more comfortable seating. And then everybody else has more barriers. And wait a second, that's a delay. That's a problem. This is a new form of identification you need to show. That's sort of what it seems like, that we have this fast track process and then this other process that gets more and more bureaucratic, more and more cumbersome for really just having most people's voices heard in the process.
That's a really great image, Michael. I might have to steal that from you. I like that a lot. And that really is the case. I mean, you've got people who, pay the extra amount to do the clear thing, right? And so they don't even have to show their ID anymore. They just sort of flash their card and they whiz right through. And it's true. I mean, if you talk to elected officials, the process of having to raise big money in, $10,000 or more checks means that you spend your evenings and your days calling through people with high net worth who can afford to write those checks. And you listen to their concerns day in and day out. And those are the phone calls you have to answer. And those are the people you have to meet with. Those are the people you have to have $500 plate fundraisers with. And it simply distorts the political voice that is being heard in the halls of power. And when you look at how much the donor class tends to be far more obsessed with the deficit versus job creation, which makes a lot of sense because they don't want a deficit that will eventually cause higher taxes, and they aren't very sensitive to the massive unemployment that we're seeing in the country. And so it really does make a difference, and I don't think there's any better example of the dominance of the donor class over our political agenda than the deficit obsession that we have seen at a time of near depression for the rest of the country.
Right. No, that's the kind of next point I want to get into, and also what we'll tie into sort of in the next step is you've written an excellent piece recently on clean election laws, which we'll get to soon. But you said something that I found really striking, and I actually don't remember whether it was in a television interview or an article or maybe even a conversation we had, where you said that kind of deficit obsession is, first of all, it's a misalignment, as I think we've established in this conversation, as you've established, the report established, between a very small sector of society and really the broader base of Americans, not just working, lower income Americans, but really even a very broad middle class of Americans that are facing this jobs crisis and this kind of anemic economy. But you've said that this deficit obsession is also about a real fear of democracy. And I just think that's fascinating because if you look in the Eurozone, this austerity budget, deficit fetishism is much clearer in terms of the sort of anti-democratic tendency, because you basically have Eurozone ministers imposing these really harsh budgets on, places like Greece or Spain. That's very explicit. In America, it's less direct in a certain sense. It's more like these more complicated and delayed processes like the sequester and things like that. But at the same time, through both the obsession with the wrong issue to begin with, and then locking ourselves into these agreements that delay our ability to really respond and anticipate to what the actual crisis is, you're seeing this real, what you call the real fear of democracy and the future. And I just love for you to get into more of that idea with us now.
Sure. I think this was actually on Up with Chris Hayes that I said that. It
Okay.
was, basically, you're right. I think it's a really great example to show how it's vastly undemocratic what's going on in Europe, and that you really have sort of bureaucrats from other countries
Right.
dictating the terms of your own country's budget. But here, it is similar in the sense that you've got elected officials who may be your representative in Congress or the Senate, but who are fundamentally beholden to someone other than the vast majority of their constituents, which is the donor class. And we had about 40 years of a mounting economic conventional wisdom that basically broke with the financial crisis of 2008.
Mm-hmm.
The inequality era sort of collapsed in and on itself. And we had the orthodoxy that said that regulation was bad, that taxes needed to be low, and that capital needed to have all of the power in our shared sort of economic ecosystem really, really show itself to be deeply flawed, not just in terms of measurements of how well most of the country was doing, between the gap between wages and productivity, the stagnating incomes at the middle and declining at the bottom, while they were skyrocketing at the top, all of that, but then actually showed that it was terrible for capitalism itself.
Right.
There was an incredible opportunity for a realignment politically coming out of the financial crisis, and I do believe that the people who had been calling the shots for a very long time became terrified of what that would mean, became terrified of the idea of the kind of economic realignment that happened after the first Gilded Age in this country and after the resulting crash, where we really did do a new economic order and a new paradigm. And as long as this paradigm, which is one that tolerates and, in fact, encourages inequality, one that is deeply unresponsive to what keeps working families up at night, the rising cost of college, job quality, child care, you're going to have the potential for a well-functioning democracy to make huge changes. And so it is very scary for, to use the civil word, the plutocrats, to think that we would have a responsive democracy where the desires of people to see a real realignment in our economy and a real government response to these pressing economic issues could just happen. And so the only way to tie the hands of that are, A, to make sure that the campaign finance system becomes less and less regulated so that the big money can continue to flow to shape the agenda in Washington, but also to put a fiscal straitjacket on what could be the government's response. If you look at all these debates around what percentage GDP there can be in government spending, that's all a number. It's 18, it's 20, it's 21, but each percentage of GDP represents something that could be a real game changer for working families, right? So it's like half a percentage point GDP for free college, right?
Right.
Another
Right,
third of a
right.
percentage point GDP for universal child care, really, truly universal child care, right? So deeper, more robust retirement, for the government to pick up that tab, since employers have been walking away from that obligations and pension security. So these are the type of things that could be on the table if we had a more responsive democracy. So when I say that there's a fear of democracy, it really is about the people who have been calling the shots for the past 40 years being very afraid that the effects of the shots that they have called, the effect of having such a stacked deck, are going to really awaken a democratic polity that's going to demand a lot more. And the only way to make sure that doesn't happen is to keep us in this austerity straitjacket.
Right. No, and I just have to say parenthetically, I like that you say that plutocrats is the polite word or civil word. I thought that was that's funny. Um, so, do you think though, just to sort of one kind of addendum on this question, there's this idea of there's the money and the special interest component, obviously, and we're going to of course elaborate on that further. But then there's this other idea that I think it was Simon Johnson, who's at MIT, I think, kind of he wrote a book about the financial crisis, and he said also had this notion that there's the idea of kind of like cognitive capture in the Washington and policy class. That part of it is there is this kind of corruption of special interest money, but there's also just this inability to think outside of these really, really narrow policy initiatives and frameworks that people have been operating out of for decades. So even as the kind of overwhelming empirical evidence comes in that it doesn't work, that there's a serious problem, that people still cannot kind of access a different way of thinking. What do you think of that way of looking at it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a major part of it, particularly when it comes to regulators
Right.
and people who are not theoretically, raising campaign funds, although, of course, they are looking for the next job when they leave office, and so often it is a revolving door to industry. A lot of it has to do with the lobbying that happens, and, I've had many regulator meetings, and I know that I and my colleagues are the only people who are coming in for weeks at a time who are not saying, you need to really go easy on the firms to make sure that there's still liquidity and these regulations are onerous. So
Right.
it's like when politicians are calling through donor lists, if you're really hearing all the time these very well-educated, well-dressed, powerful, and rich people saying that if you act in what is the broad public interest, you will crash the economy and you will be, sort of excoriated as one of the, sort of stupid Luddites.
Right.
That does have an impact on your worldview. So we definitely have that issue, and I think it's also very hard when you think about sort of Washington as a place and how much the sort of professional lobbying and sort of for defense, it's the defense industrial, but also just sort of like the regulatory industrial influence peddling class that surrounds itself in Washington comes from, a very narrow slice of the American people. And there is a conventional wisdom, and it is fundamentally conservative, even if people do have sort of liberal tendencies on various issues. It's fundamentally conservative in the sort of classic sense of the term, in terms of conservative against change, and very disapproving of radical notions that would really disrupt the day-to-day. Because the status quo is really fine in Washington.
Right.
That's the problem, right? There is not a lot of economic pain among the people who are setting policies. And they don't see a lot of economic pain. I mean, the capital has been booming.
Right.
And so it's really hard to think I would set aside the rules that are creating this status quo because something else is really urgent, when there's really just, frankly, a bit too much comfort among our policy elite.
Right, and certainly a kind of lack of empathy and humanizing outside of those really narrow confines. Now, you have a great new piece in the New York Amsterdam News talking about a clean elections bill that I think is it currently in the New York State Legislature, I think.
It is.
Yeah, I'd love you to just talk what's in that bill, why is it important, what's that about?
Yeah. So, we have a chance here in New York. I'm in New York to be the first state post Citizens United to pass really fundamental transformational campaign finance reform. And this bill that's currently being considered by the state legislature and is backed at least nominally by Governor Cuomo would do a few things. One, it would lower the sort of sky-high contribution limits that the finance system currently has in Albany. Most importantly, it would match donations, private small dollar donations, up to 6-1, which is basically replicating the New York City system. And so it means in practicality that instead of, going to those $500 plate fundraisers, candidates for office in Albany would be door knocking in their neighborhoods, listening to the concerns of their actual constituents, getting small dollar donations, and having them match so that that a $50 donation meant hundreds of dollars to them. And we've seen that at the city level, with the same kind of public match, the donations in neighborhoods like Bedford-Stuyvesant, the Bronx, Harlem, the South Bronx, Chinatown, where they're more working-class neighborhoods, are multiple times, often as much as 24 times more important to the city council representatives of those neighborhoods than those donations are to the state legislative council, to the state legislators in those neighborhoods, because state legislators are still working under that broken system. So it's something that could be a real game changer, is completely constitutional under the court's sort of current jurisprudence, and would really diversify the donor base as well as potentially who can run, right? You don't have to be a millionaire or know a millionaire to run if you have publicly financed elections. So basically between now and the end of the session in Albany early this summer, there's got to be a lot of pressure put on state legislators and on Cuomo to make good on this promise.
Yeah, no, and so just really in terms of the calling your representatives, having a very kind of active public voice in this, and this thing really does have a shot at passing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is something that, Governor Cuomo really prides himself on his efficacy, and he has put himself out here and saying he wants to be, the campaign finance reform governor and the first one after Citizens United. He's been doing lots of public statements about it, and so that means that basically if he hears from the people of New York and as well from, particularly from progressives across the country, that this is something that they're watching, it's going to mean he'll do what it takes to push it over the line. I think the governor is looking at 2016. He wants to have his bona fides. He, pushed through gun control right after Newtown, and I think he's looking to make a name for himself on this issue. And I think he also recognizes, to be a little less cynical about it, that the system is broken and that Albany is one of the most dysfunctional legislatures in the country, and people are able to use sort of shell corporations to give $500,000 unrestricted gifts that get funneled to candidates, and that, when it comes down to it, elected officials actually don't like to spend all their time fundraising. They would like to be freed from that. And we're about to release a report at Demos that looks at the experience of Connecticut, which has
I would love for you to get into that.
system.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So in Connecticut, after the governor was put in jail in 2008, they passed a public financing system that is similar to what's being proposed in New York. And what the Demos report authors saw when they did a bunch of interviews with different interest groups and public interest groups and legislators, current and former, from Connecticut, was that it was really a brand new kind of politics after public financing. Legislators listened a lot more to their constituents than they did to lobbyists. Lobbyists just didn't have the power that they had before under the broken system because they couldn't come with checks in one hand and a bill model legislation in the other. And people really felt like there was sort of a change in the tenor of politics in Connecticut. And for, what matters to me, the policies changed. You saw after 2008 policies that impact working and middle-class families getting a fair hearing and, in fact, passing. We saw paid sick days. We saw an increase in the minimum wage. We saw an in-state DREAM Act. So these are a lot of things that when, as the Stat Deck report shows, when people who are the donor class are setting the agenda, where is the minimum wage and paid sick days going to be in the list of priorities? Not very high. But once you have a finance system that is actually relying on working and middle-class donors, you see a difference in the policy.
Right. No, and the case of Connecticut, by the way, I just want to say the name of your piece in the New York Amsterdam News is "Let the People Pay the Piper," and the Connecticut example is really is really inspiring. I think also because Connecticut doesn't necessarily have the an image of a state like maybe Vermont or something, of being kind of relatively small or clean or something. I mean, as you said, the governor went to jail. There's been a lot of issues in Connecticut. So if this has a serious impact in Connecticut, it's a really powerful model. And yeah, if you live outside of New York, Albany is pretty unbelievable, kind of notorious. So this could be a great testing ground for that as well. And then but I think what's the kind of really important takeaway, and maybe the way to kind of wrap this all together, is that there is the social issues. It's all interconnected, obviously, and the social issues are profoundly important and key, whether it's marriage equality or gun control or the environment. But there is this entire base of economic issues that really are going to the heart of really the future of whether we're going to continue to have mobility and kind of upward growth, and people having an opportunity to go out and fulfill their potential, or even just have security and dignity as they retire and as they live their lives. And the disconnect between a donor class and those policies that affect people sort of being achieved are really, really vital. So that these kind of things like clean elections and stuff like that, they're not just sort of nice, good government issues. They really go to the heart of whether or not we're going to have policies passed and legislated that address the kind of core crisis facing middle class, working class people today.
That's exactly right. And I'll just leave you with this sort of killer fact.
Please.
From a Princeton political scientist, Larry Bartels. He ran the numbers and found that when the opinion of the working and middle class diverged from the sort of donor class, the elected officials' behavior so closely tracked with that of the donor class that, in fact, the bottom third of the income distribution had no apparent impact, zero, on the behavior of their elected officials.
Wow. So that's really disheartening, but the lesson and the place we can be optimistic about is that if we follow your lead and we pass clean elections and things like that, then we all can become the donor class and hopefully have a more responsive politics.
That's great.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Heather. It's just great talking with you.